Hey, this is Pastor Bunjee Garrett, and I want to take this opportunity to present you with another word of encouragement. Now, as I continue to consider the state of our nation, well, it seems clear to me that the American dream has quickly turned into a nightmare as the cost of living continues to increase. As a matter of fact, the price of gasoline is up by 60%, and the price of our groceries has increased by 12%, and the cost of living here is just getting higher and higher. And not only that, but crime rates are also getting higher and higher in every major city where a Democrat mayor is in charge. And whether we're talking about smash and grabs or home invasions or violent crimes like homicide, rape, robbery, and assault, every major city run by the Democrats is currently enduring a crime wave which has clearly been created by the progressive law enforcement policies that they've been employing. That's right, progressive law enforcement policies that, protect criminals over the police. They're currently creating the conditions for the crime wave that's occurring here in our country. Case in point, it was actually 2020. That's when the homicide rate in the U.S. increased by nearly 30% when compared to 2019. The same trend continued again in 2021 as homicide rates increased another 5% over 2020. And then according to the current data, the violent crime rate is continuing to increase here in 2022. As a matter of fact, violent crime in 2022 has increased there in Los Angeles, California by nearly 9%, while homicides have increased by more than 7%. The people in Washington, D.C., they've also seen a 12% increase in violent crime this year, with homicide rates jumping up more than 13%. And there in Atlanta, Georgia, violent crime has increased year over year more than 5%, while the homicide rate is currently over 13% higher when compared to this time last year. And it's sad to say that we're actually watching the same trend occurring in every major American city run by the Democrats. And as we continue to watch, the cost of living increasing and the crime rates increasing, well, we're also watching an increasing number of illegal immigrants crossing over our southern border. And while I have no doubt that the most of these people are crossing the border in hopes of a better life, listen, Biden's failure to secure our southern border is simultaneously creating the conditions which allow for the Mexican cartels to run their operations like child sex trafficking and drug smuggling and also gun running. Listen, while our Border Patrol agents are busy processing the thousands of people who walk across our southern border every single day, the cartels are busy accomplishing their criminal enterprises elsewhere. And as a result, Biden's border policies have effectively enabled the cartels to engage in child sex trafficking and drug smuggling and gun running and all the illegal things that they're doing. Meanwhile, Democrat leaders continue to create soft on-crime policies which allow the criminals, who get caught to just go free. For example, it was just last week when two men allegedly tied to the Mexican cartels, they were arrested in New York City after getting caught with more than $1 million of crystal meth. But then they were just released one day later because, they probably already learned their lesson. Am I right? Sadly, this is the sort of soft on crime criminal system that sends these criminals just back out onto the streets with little more than a slap on the wrist. Another example of this can be seen in the fact that it was earlier this week when the Democrat majority of the House Judiciary Committee, they unanimously voted against an effort to increase penalties for child sex traffickers. And while you would think that the prosecution of child sex traffickers would be a bipartisan effort, it was actually the Democrats there who rejected Representative Chip Roy's efforts to increase the incarceration time of those who get caught trafficking children and sending them into the sex industry. Now, I can't help but to wonder, what's the connection here? What's the connection between the Democrats who voted against this effort to increase penalties for child sex traffickers and what's the connection between those people and the policies that are allowing, the Mexican cartels to engage in child sex trafficking there at our southern border? And are these the same people who are actively suppressing the Jeffrey Epstein client list while simultaneously funding drag queen story time in schools and public libraries? Are they trying to protect Pedo Peter or the rest of the sexual predators who are currently entrenched in the political system of our nation? And if so, then are these nefarious characters trying to distract us with increasing inflation and rising crime rates as they continue to set the stage for their liberal world order, which will include the sexualization of minors? If that's the case, then we desperately need leaders to fix our political system so that criminals are not only being caught, but also incarcerated in such a way that further crime would then be discouraged. This is precisely the reason for why our Creator gave us human government. And just to be clear, listen, human government is supposed to strike fear into the hearts of criminals. I like the way that Paul described it in Romans chapter 13. It's there where he declares, "Rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil." Do you want to be unafraid of the authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same. For he is God's minister to you for good. But if you do evil, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is God's minister, an avenger to execute wrath on him who practices evil. Listen, the Lord designed human government for the specific purpose of punishing criminals. And yet, rather than punishing the criminals here in America, the progressive left seems to be more interested in limiting the rights of law-abiding citizens, which then turns around and emboldens the criminals. Proof of my point? Well, it's not only seen in their unwillingness to increase penalties for child sex traffickers, but they're also working hard to create what they call common sense gun laws, which there's not much common sense at all. Because listen, this only infringes upon the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding citizens. And listen, if they succeed at this, well, we can be certain that violent crimes in America will continue to increase because criminals don't obey common sense gun laws. You might not know this, but listen, there's a recent study from the Crime Prevention Research Center that provides us with a list that actually catalogs more than 60 instances in which a concealed carry permit holder actually stopped a mass shooter. According to the report, there's no reason to believe that this is even a comprehensive list, given how little media coverage is actually devoted to these heroic acts. Should also be noted that there were more than 1 million defensive uses of a firearm here in America back in 2021. Think about that for a moment. More than 1 million defensive uses of a firearm, or in other words, more than 1 million people were forced to defend themselves with their own firearm last year alone. Now, imagine what would have happened in those situations if those people didn't have a gun, if they were forced to rely on the arrival of law enforcement agents, which can take some time. It was just last Thursday in Escambia County, Florida, when a man was forced to defend his own home against 3 armed assailants who broke into his home. Thankfully for him, he had a rifle, and he used that to send the would-be burglars fleeing for their lives. And you better believe that this would have been a completely different story if the homeowner was unarmed and waiting for the police to come and protect him. With all this being the case, listen, it's crucial for every American to be ready to defend our families and our properties. And not only that, but it's time for our nation to wake up, quit being woke, and wake up and realize that the progressive leaders who are freeing criminals so that they can freely commit more crimes, they're actually turning the American dream into a nightmare. Therefore, we must elect leaders who are ready to prosecute career criminals and without any apologies. Finally, I encourage every Christian to remember that our political system is actually created by the culture, and our culture is created by those who actually take a stand for what they believe in. That's why such a small amount of people are impacting the culture in such a major way, because they are so outspoken about their beliefs. And with that being the case, it's time for Christians to make this impact on our culture. It's time for us to take a stand for our beliefs. And it's time for us to proudly proclaim that Jesus is the only hope that America has. Listen, if you really want to help fix the problems here in America, then we must start leading the lost to the foot of the cross so that they might be saved by faith in Jesus Christ. And in this way, we make an impact on the culture, which then has an impact on politics. With this as the goal, I encourage every born-again believer, let's become those committed Christians who are actually fighting the good fight of faith, and all for the glory of God.